All right, guys. Hello, my name is Sharnael Wolverton Stefan. I'm here with True TV. Super excited to have back a dear lady, Mary Rodwell. And so welcome back to our show, Miss Mary. How are you today?
I am good. Always lovely to meet you.
Yes. So what time is it where you are? You're all the way across the pond. Well, not just the pond, you're across the world.
A big pond. It's actually 10 o'clock in the morning, which is a good time for me.
Okay, good. Awesome. Well, we're just glad that we got you here and appreciate you so much. If you don't know anything about Mary, please do go back to my first interview with her and get some groundwork. But she has been a part of a major piece of humanity for us to be able to kind of remember, see what's going on out there to help bring healing to some things. I have her books, The Awakening. Oh, if you can, the glare there. The Awakening is a great book, as well as The New Human. She has interviewed tons of people. She's done counseling. She's in documentaries. She's in movies. People have her on radio shows and interviews all the time. But tell us a little bit, how do you describe your background and what you do?
Well, I started out as a nurse and a midwife. And it was then after my family, I got drawn into being asked if I'd like to learn counseling. It was very new, 40 years ago. But I was fascinated about counseling because it seemed to me that it's far better to look for prevention rather than cure. And so for me, prevention was looking at emotional health and psychological health. And that appealed to the healer side of me that says, can we stop things before they happen? But it then took me from that, because I worked in a medical practice, I got given everything, from psychiatric disorders right through to grief and bereavement. It was a whole range of issues. And some of them really were very spiritual, because I would have somebody come to me and say, my dad talks to me. And I'd say, well, is it helpful? And they'd go, yes. He looks after me and he helps me understand things. And so I was always open to how useful your awareness was, rather than the judgment of others. Well, I don't get that, therefore someone's crazy. For me, it was always honoring their experience and their reality and how they managed it. And as long as they were managing it well, then I didn't see there was any issue with that. This led me, when I came to Australia, to really focusing on more of the spiritual, more in terms, I worked with grief and bereavement in Australia, where people were having profound experiences, either prior to their own death or those that had lost someone profoundly, and there would be getting strange things happen and what have you. So more and more my interest was, so what is this non-physical world? How do we access it? What is going on for people? Because it seemed to me that although nobody ever talked about it outside of this kind of environment, many people were having these experiences but never talked about them. So this led me looking into past lives, hypnosis, a whole range of spiritual things. But what really brought me into this particular field, where now I'm working with people that have interactions with the angelic realm, religious figures, Jesus, for example, or other religious figures. We would call fairies, elementals, and strange beings that look, that might be blue with big black eyes, or they might look like mantis beings like this, or ant-like beings, or crystalline beings, or feline beings, or energy beings. And that really was where I began to realize that it was all connected. And so for me, part of my work was learning how that operated. And I was fortunate enough to be guided to open up that part of myself for 3 years. And that has enabled me to help people put it into a package that they can operate with in a way that they feel safe, and the way that they can manage it in what I call the 3D, bringing it into 3D and normalizing it and realizing how helpful it is when you're and you can call it your inner voice if you so choose. It doesn't matter. You can call it your higher self, or you can call it spirit guides or angels. It really doesn't matter how you interpret it, as long as the information and the awareness supports your everyday life in ways that are helpful and positive for you. So in essence, that's what brought me in, is my own spiritual journey, and being led, I feel, by another aspect of myself to understand that we are multidimensional beings. And with that, how can we operate with it in a world that is so confusing in the 3D? How can we make sense of things? And so a lot of my work now is about that. But more than that, it's about honoring these hundreds of thousands, I suspect millions of people that are having these interactions, whether they believe it's angels or some religious figure, or whether they believe it's, a little gray being or or another kind of being, supporting them with their awareness so that they're not afraid, they're not fearful of it, but actually can make sense of it in their lives in a useful and positive way.
Yeah, that's really, really good. And I mean, I know you work a lot with children too, and and adults, and all the people that you're interviewing and hanging out with. Sorry, my dog's barking a little bit. What do you ever see where you're seeing similar type looking beings, or is something that's familiar with people that for a fact this person hasn't talked to that person? They're not going to be talking to us, because some of your stuff is Zoom, some of it's in live. People come from all over the world to do regressions with you and to get consultations. But do you ever see like a theme of things that all look the same kind of thing?
Absolutely. And that's the basis of both my books, really, is the fact that I was noticing patterns of experience. And this is when you have people contacting you. It may be the first time in their lives they've spoken about their experiences. They haven't read anything. Some of them even don't believe in ETs, for example. So it's not about a belief. It's about an experience they've had that they don't understand. And many of them will say to me, well, I hope I'm not crazy. Because part of them wonders whether or not they are going crazy. So, for me, it isn't about believers in extraterrestrial contact. In many cases, they don't actually have a belief in it at all. And that's what's so shocking to them, when a being appears in their bedroom, or they suddenly feel they've been taken to some strange craft where they see different beings that people see. The majority is actually humanoid. It isn't the little greys that everybody, although they're down the list, there's second or third where some will see the little greys, but many of them are humanoid beings that they're seeing. And they were, and what is important here is, more than anything, our problem with society being programmed into a belief system or a reality that's inaccurate, because even modern psychology is saying to you, unless you're seeing it with your 5 senses, you can't trust it. It's got to be a fantasy, or it's got to be your imagination. And the bottom line is, these experiences are way beyond what people would normally even think to imagine. And I have an understanding of the patterns that will tell me very, very clearly that this person, wouldn't know that, because it's not in mainstream knowledge. It's not in a lot of the books. Certain experiences only happen when they happen because they have experienced them, not because they've read about them. And this is children too, that will talk about experience they've had where they're being taken through the window by a bright light. and they go up on the spacecraft. And I'm talking about 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds that explain that they have little beings that come and visit them and take them through the window, and explain that they're taught things on with other children, and some children not even looking very normal or human. They will say their eyes look different, and they knew they were different. So when you've got 5, 6, 7-year-olds explaining that they go at night to a special school, they're learning about how to use abilities, for example, using terminology that their parents say, I've never spoken about things like this. I'll give you a very brief example of something I had recently of a 9-year-old explaining his experiences. And he said the beings were about the size of a 5-year-old with black eyes and grey skin. They put him to sleep and they take him. They're part of a science team, he explained, and told him he was special. He also talked about sometimes his head feels funny, and he said, it vibrates, and then his soul goes up through his head, and he said he can go anywhere in the universe. So this is out of body experiences we're talking about. He also explained a little bit about, he talked about the education on board craft. Remember, this is a 9-year-old. He said he told me they make him forget, and he's visited at least once a week. There are other children like him where he's taken on board the craft. He said he seems to be getting an in-depth education from these beings. And he said they also teach him about the past and the future. He explained that he was told about the ultraviolet light being a creation spectrum. Now, this is not what you hear from normal children of that age. He said this is what actually creates. The ET showed him what creates. He explained that these beings have an IQ of over 400, was part of his understanding. So when you get this kind of information from a child that shouldn't know anything about it, and the parents say, look, we've never talked about this. We've never explained this kind of thing because why would we? It's complex information. This is just a small part of what I've put in the book. And the reason for that is because parents were writing to me and saying, this is what my child is saying. It's freaking me out. I don't know how they know these things. They'll talk about their special friends that come at night and they explain what they look like. Sometimes they're humanoid. Sometimes they're a blue being. They might be a little mantis being that's coming. And one of the 8-year-olds explained to me in my office, he was saying that although he's looking human, his family, his real soul family, are the mantis. And when he dies, he's going back to being a mantis, was how he explained it. So he's even aware that he can be another form. Where does this come from when you're 8 years old? I mean, it's not something you see on television or on cartoons or we read about. These are the kinds of incredible information these children talk about. And that's what drew my attention, was because the parents were confused. They didn't know how to deal with it. And then after I wrote the book, I was getting clinical psychologists and educators writing to me and saying, some of these children you talk about, I'm seeing them. I'm seeing them in my class, or I'm seeing them in my practice. Have you got any advice in terms of how I can help? Because sometimes the parents haven't got a clue what's going on or why. So this is not just an isolated thing here. What I'm hearing, and some of the children that I've spoken to have been from Europe, they've been to South America, from India, from Africa, a whole range of countries. And the parents, as long as they're English speaking, are writing to me and saying, this is what my child is saying. But what's interesting with that is often the parents also have been having unusual experiences. And there's no question in my mind now that this is an intergenerational phenomena. And the parents may not be quite as tuned in as the children are, but they have awareness or have had experiences as well.
And sometimes what I have seen and just with my experience with others is the child will have the situation happen, and then so you'll talk to the parent, and really turns out they have had these experiences, but they just didn't even know that it was anything to be thinking about, like missing time or bright lights out a window, like you said, or some of them have actually had miscarriages and then no baby. Some of the, and you can go into that a lot more, I'm sure, with your experiences. But I was actually brought in Wyoming. I was doing some conferences there, and a pastor there had contacted me to have a private meeting because she was trying to figure out how to counsel. She had up to 40 women at the same time that were all at her church that had all had been impregnated, they say, by, being taken, put on ships, having these memories. And multiple of them came, at different times. But then after a pregnancy would show up out of nowhere, most of them were like, why, how did this even happen? And then the pregnancy, after 3 or 4 months, I think it was a 3-month mark, the baby would be taken, which I know you can speak a lot into it, but I'm just saying here in America, that was a big deal for someone to contact me and say, hey, can you help me figure out how to counsel these women, because this pastor this definitely wasn't her belief system for sure. And these women, and she was 100% sure that, because I had even said, well, do you think they all got together and kind of like, but they had evidence. I mean, you could see, and I talked with a few of these ladies, and, it would be pretty crazy for them all to get together and to be able to have the same stories. But I'm sure have you spoken or talked to anyone about situations like that?
Absolutely. And that's part of the reason I wrote Awakening, because, these missing pregnancies where someone would feel pregnant and it would be very real. And they, often they would have it confirmed by the doctor. And then after the 8 to 12 weeks, suddenly there's no pregnancy, there's no fetus, there's nothing. And, the doctors dismiss a lot of things and saying, oh, it was reabsorbed and all the rest of it. But I wouldn't like to think how many millions out there have experienced this. And when you actually explore it and you take them into hypnosis, you can actually come to the point where they actually see what's happening. And in the missing pregnancies that I wrote about in Awakening, there was one really significant story that of an English lady that had always been aware that something had happened. At the 3-month mark, she'd lost the pregnancy. But what was interesting about her story was her second son kept saying, I've got a brother, but he's not here. He's on the spacecraft. And she didn't want to hear it. And she hated it. She said, well, if it's so, they're evil. They've, taken my child. How dare they? And it was when she came to Australia that we did a hypnosis. And she remembered actually the actual process of them taking this fetus and putting it into a special place to keep it alive, as many hybrids are. And the emotional part of it, and people may struggle with this, was she was talking to the beings about them taking this child. And the reason that it was so profound is that her human doctor had said it was dangerous for her to have a third pregnancy, because the second pregnancy, her child was nearly stillborn. And so he was saying it's quite dangerous for you to go again. And he was basically encouraging her to think about, well, should she go again, because it could cost her a life. So she was in this conflict when she was on board craft. And basically these beings said, look, the same thing. If you go ahead, you could lose not only the child, but your own life. And she'd got 2 boys. So she said, if If you promise to look after him and love him the way I would, you can have him. So she'd actually consented without being aware of it. And then she actually was presented with her child. He came to her in that session, and it completely changed her whole attitude and understanding, because she realized she was a participant in that. And what's interesting is that when I've and I'm not saying this perhaps happens with every pregnancy, but it does seem, the one woman told me she had 20 pregnancies, but she said, look, I need a break, give me a break, because I want a break now from this. And she had a break. So many feel that once they understand there is some kind of contract with this, and many of the young children that I've spoken to have been shown, one 8-year-old explained to me, a lovely little 8-year-old in the US explained to me that she'd been taken on board craft. She'd been shown how to levitate, to use her abilities, her psychic abilities, etc. And she said, and they showed me genetic engineering, and they showed how they make different species from, use different DNA from different species, because they seed other planets. And she was being shown a lot of the genetic engineering, and that a lot of these hybrids, the parents, the mothers that have had these children often get taken on board craft and introduced to their hybrid children and connecting to them, because they're part human, part non-human. And one woman in England, I always remember doing a regression with her, and she was one of those that helped the human mothers on board craft connect to their children on board craft, these hybrid children. And I was blown away at how normal she made it. It was quite incredible. So there's so much more going on than we realize. And I believe there is much about the hybrids that we need to understand, including those that relate to being hybrid, human hybrids on this planet now, and talk about saying, I'm a hybrid. And they'll actually say to me, and I'm more connected to the star system or that star system than I am to being human. So we're getting it going both ways.
Well, I was just looking up, because one of the, I don't know if this will even show up, but this documentary, Extraordinary Seeding, was, wow. I mean, that one, there's tons of amazing ones. I saw the one with you and your son, that documentary, which it's on my list too. Let me find it. My mom talks to aliens. I hope you guys will check that out. But yeah, going back to the whole question. So for the purpose, and by the way, I hope you guys are sharing this and do your due diligence. Please do share this and help me with the algorithms, so we can make sure this information does get out. But for what so they're seeding for other planets, and or do you think a lot of it's just like experimental, kind of like just seeing what happens?
I will say something that was told to me in recent years about a woman in Australia who was taken by the mantis and what she called benevolent reptilians, and shown where they do this genetic engineering and creating hybrids. And she said that the mantis beings explain they're master geneticists. They have the DNA of everything that's ever been created, whether it's plant, animal, or different species. So they are constantly working with what will work on different planets. So for this planet, I've gone into very deeply, because of my background. I wanted to know, where's the evidence of the fact that we may be intelligently created. And Dr. Francis Crick, the co-founder of the DNA molecule, was one of those very early on who said he was sure that we were intelligently designed. There is too much complexity for it to be just us slowly evolving. And when we go back to Cro-Magnon and Neanderthal, and then we have this missing link, and Homo sapiens sapiens is suddenly on the planet with twice the brain size and 223 genes that were a sideways insertion of genetic material that the geneticists can't explain, don't know how it got there. The evidence is there. that we are, we are intelligently designed. And what is interesting too, that they say that we have 95% dormant DNA.
Right.
So what is that dormant DNA that they can't explain? They used to call it junk DNA because they didn't know what on earth it was. And now they're calling it dormant, and they're still trying to work out what it is. And so what we're hearing here is an anomaly within our own DNA that the scientists as yet don't fully understand. But those that are having experiences talk about their DNA being activated by their interactions with these beings. And as it gets activated, more and more of their multidimensional abilities, their psi abilities, clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairsentience, this communication that many of them have is being activated through their interaction with these beings, which in the past, of course, were considered gods. The gods of old were really just many of these star visitors that were coming in with greater, incredible technology that looked miraculous to the populace, and of course were worshipped as gods. And I think we've got to come back to modern day now and saying if these beings arrived with this technology, we'd say it's technology, because we would know it's technology, not miraculous anymore. So it's there. We've got it in artwork, we've got it in cave drawings, we've got it everywhere you look, UFOs, strange beings, etc., etc. It's all there for anyone, looking at archaeology and the hidden archaeology. It's very evident that we've been visited all through history. So their purpose is, like they're doing on many other planets with different environments, is creating a species that can operate in a particular environment. And that's, when people say to me, are these hybrids going to come and take over the world? I said, look, we're all hybrids and we've already taken over the world. So what's your problem?
Yes, no, Dr. Brooks Agnew tonight had actually posted something earlier and said, I've never done an interview with an alien, but if there's anyone out there that would like to take the shot, I'll be available at this link at 8 o'clock. And I posted on there, I'm an alien. It's like, we're all aliens, but going back to the junk DNA, it's, as a scientist geek that I am, they say junk DNA, but the DNA in the cells that isn't fully active, and then there's supposedly some dead space in the brain. We're only using 3 to 5%, and then also what as below so above. The galaxies are supposedly 95% unknown. So I really believe that there's even a connection to, as we go in, then we also see more and experience more, not only have the technology within us as we activate our own DNA, but then the brain wakes up and then we're able to connect with the galaxies in that way. And there's 215 million gigabytes in each cell that we have in our body. And we have trillion cells, right? So, and I just was studying here this week, minerals are a big piece for activating that too. But, and they're taking minerals out of our food and different things. They're dumbing us down with chemtrails and all the food stuff too. That has a hindrance on the DNA a little bit too, to keep it dumbed down, to not actually have the pituitary pineal connection. But you are so right with these, I guess triggers might be not a good word, but opportunities. If you hear a story or you're around someone in their field, or you read something, there's memories can come up and something can be activated where you're like, oh gosh, I just remembered being 5 years old and sitting on a radiator looking outside the window waiting for them to take me, or missing time, or some glimpse of a memory that you think, oh, well, that doesn't fit this at all. That doesn't make any sense. Let me just push that away. And you try to not be crazy about it, right? But if we're paying attention, I think there's a lot of people who are actually having a lot more contact and or connection to things. You mentioned that sometimes it's generational, or you believe it's generational. What, in your study of asking, do they tell you why they're picked? I mean, is there any common theme of this is why you're picked? We picked your family because blah, blah, blah.
Well, there's two. I think there's something more than just being picked. I certainly the DNA, certain DNA lines seem to be a lot more common. One of them's O negative. There are many that have O negative blood that, for whatever reason, that seems to be a very common pattern, but not all. There's, but that certainly is one of them. Not that I put that in the questionnaire. The questionnaire is more to trigger more understanding of their own experience, because people don't realize if they've got a phobia of clowns, for example, or a phobia of Santa Claus, that actually can be a screen memory for the beings. That they've always had a real scary clowns, I can't stand them, or Santa Claus, or owls are another one, because often the screen memory of the owl outside the window is actually, it's not an owl. It's in fact can be one of these beings, for example. But the fear is there because they know that something is not quite right. So phobias can be a good indication. Long corridors, being in lifts, because that emulates going up into the craft, for example. That's, you can have a phobia of being on a dentist chair with needles, because that emulates something that they've experienced on board craft, and they get absolutely freaked out. Not just the normal, I don't want to do this. This is being freaked out, totally freaked out by it. A phobia of spiders, because there are some beings that are interdimensional that look like spiders. And these people, they just see a tiny spider. They don't know why they're absolutely phobic about it. But actually, it can be a real indicator that they've had some form of experience, given the fact that there may be other things as well.
Snakes and reptilians.
Yeah, absolutely. All of that. So they're good indicators, but there are other things too. I ask about, their childhood. Did they have, the night terrors? Now, some night terrors are absolutely normal. Kids can get those. But if they're really extreme, it may be that child is tapping into being taken. So it's about asking them more about what's going on when that happens, or what they may be perceiving, rather than just saying, oh, it's all right, there's nothing there, you're going to be fine. That won't cut it. Not if they've had, they know that they're going somewhere. Not all children are afraid, mind you. Only some of them might be afraid or aware of it or whatever. But children, I know a 3.5-year-old was talking to his mum about the lights that outside the window that were a spacecraft, and they all were taken, including Daddy. And he said he wasn't so scared when he saw that Mummy and Daddy were with him, taken on board craft as well. So, there's the intergenerational side of this, that, it's often the whole family. And that was what was intriguing me. Because there's two things with that. First of all is why certain families, and I certainly think there's a DNA link, but I also think that these intelligences are actually, if you like, looking at human consciousness itself and putting out, if you like, certain frequencies for activation of the DNA, so that all of humanity on some level is being activated. Only some are more activated than others. And this is because they've got a certain role to play in what happens on this planet. Many get downloads of physics, for example. Others get awareness of new healing techniques. Others get very drawn into ecological programs. And that is often what has been placed as a protocol for them and their role on this planet, because they say we're destroying our environment, and if we keep going the way we are going now, we will destroy ourselves, including the fact that this was exponential as soon as we started using nuclear weapons and what have you, because these beings are saying you can affect us, not just yourselves with it.
Yes. Yeah, we were potentially blowing. Well, just the practicing of the tests that they were doing was affecting, time, space, and that protection around the Earth's protection. So yeah, there's all kinds of military people who have come forward in Montana, North Dakota, California, Florida, where nukes were, and all of a sudden everything's turned off and they can't turn it on, or some test was supposed to happen and it didn't happen. So it's true for sure. Oh wait, go ahead. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
sorry, I got a beep on here, but go ahead.
Okay. What I'd like to say when people, there's two things that are surveys that we did with the Dr. Edgar Mitchell Free Foundation that was started about 5 years ago, and is all in Beyond UFOs, is the surveys with 4,200 people globally. I think there were 600 to 700 questions. 15 PhDs were involved. I mean, it was a very important, credible survey. Two things that came out were particularly important that we hadn't realized was that 75% of these encounters are non-physical. They are out-of-body experiences, and only 25% are physical. That's why so many say, well, I had a dream where I was on a spacecraft and this happened and what have you. And my question to them is, when was that dream? And they might say 10 years ago. And I'm saying, well, it's not a dream because normally dreams disappear within seconds. And if you're still remembering that dream, it's because you were in an altered state or you're out of body, and it appears like a dream. So that's what I've got in my questionnaire, is the dreams. Did you have a dream of this or a dream of that? And do you still remember it? Because often that's suggesting something about their experiences. So that's really, really important. And the other question that was asked about the changes after waking up to having experiences, and often there's a time of fear to start with until they start to work out what's happening and why. And as they become less fearful, they become more and more able to open up and understand this interaction that they're having. We noticed that in the end, the ultimate result of many of these interactions was 85% had a psycho-spiritual transformation. 85%. Only 15% were still fearful. And I suspect some of that was because of their interactions with my lab. That's the human military side that also abduct people. And people may or may not be aware of that. But I believe a lot of the most traumatized were certainly the ones that had the military alongside the ET, and often mixed up them both. But 85% of experiences, psycho-spiritual transformation, is huge, because this is, no one in mainstream has any idea that this is the change that is caused through our interactions with these intelligences. So very, very significant.
That's really encouraging. I know they seem to carry messages too. I like how you were talking about the downloads of just suddenly having information or physics or a song or an invention or books, you know, beautiful things that can come from it. But I didn't know about the stats of 85%. I mean, I think the movies try to make it, you know, their narrative is like, be afraid of this. This is terrible. Yes. Except for like E.T. The kid wasn't afraid. E.T. phoned home. You know, it was just like there's this beautiful relationship with, and that was supposed to be based on a true story, actually. I don't know if you knew that, but yeah, I agree that the MyLab stuff would be very difficult. What would you do, or what would you say to someone who's just watching this and you know, realizing, you know, maybe this happened to me. I'm sure you get people after they're reading your books or whatever, and they may have just felt led, like you were led to your path. You know, I was led to this, and I know that everyone who should and would and has some sort of connection is going to find whoever they need to find to help with their journey. But what would you do for someone who's popping in and going, oh my gosh, now what? I think this happened to me. What's the next step?
one of the first things that I do is I send them my questionnaire, and it's not the same as a lot of the ufological ones, which are very much more on the whole nuts and bolts. You know, when did you see the craft? What time was it? How many people were with you? This kind of thing. This covers feeling different, always feeling different, like you're not from here. Talking about being ultra sensitive. For example, many of those that have had experiences find that they are able to see a broader spectrum of light. Often they may see energy fields, they may see balls of light, they may see beings or whatever. Asking them about that kind of sensitivity, for example, is really important. Asking them about other experiences, you know, have they ever seen a craft, and for how long? Because people don't realize that when they see something like a craft outside, whether it's a ball of light or it's, you know, whatever they think it is, often there's an interaction they don't realize has happened. Somebody writes to me and says, well, I saw something the other night and it was weird and whatever, and they'll say, you know, I only watched it for a short time. Often there is something that's happened that they don't realize, because they can even be picked up. And I'll say to them, did you feel differently afterwards? Did you feel different? And they say, yeah, I've got really focused on this kind of thing now, and I'm really finding I don't want to harm things, or I, you know, this kind of thing. I know full well there's been an interaction or whatever. So this sense of feeling connected to the stars, a sense that, you know, that there's a lot of things that aren't right on this planet. This kind of awareness starts to bleed through after they've had these experiences. And that's what's in the questionnaire. It's to help them connect the dots. And as they do that, things that they didn't realize were pertinent, things that might have happened in their childhood that they hadn't really thought too much about. They saw a craft and 2 hours later, they suddenly realized the clock, there's been something wrong with the time. And how is it they've looked, where's that 2 hours gone? You know, or these kinds of anomalies in their life, they hadn't really put two and two together. The questionnaire helps them connect the dots. Then I say, well, what do you want to do with that now? Do you want to explore it more? Do you want to understand? And often by reading material about this, I don't discourage anyone to read anything, because they've been told by researchers, oh, don't read anything, and then I just want what you have got. Actually, the more you read, the more you connect to the information. So if you want to understand yourself, read some of this material and see where it connects for you, because that's what it's all about. And that's what the questionnaire was about. It's helping people put it together. Then they may decide, well, I'm going to get a regression. I want to find out what happened when I was 3 or when I was 5 or when I was 16. And, you know, me and my friends. One of the interesting stories I will tell you was a lady who was very involved in the environment, passionate, absolutely passionate. She was involved in groups to do with protecting the environment, and she never knew why, because all her brothers and sisters were all scientists, and they couldn't understand why she was the renegade, the black sheep of the family. And she, so we actually went and asked for the origin of her passion, if you like. And she was someone that was traveling to the north of Australia in a group. And as they were going along, they noticed some strange lights, and they stopped the car and they watched these lights, and then they saw what they thought were indigenous Aborigines coming towards them. But what she saw in her trance was they weren't Aborigines, they were actually beings floating towards them. In trance, she actually saw what they were. And in her conscious memory, they suddenly found themselves on the main road a day later, and nobody really questioned it for some reason. But what actually happened, she was taken up with these individuals and put in front of a huge screen, which was telling her, you can't do this to your environment. You've got to stop doing this. You need to protect the environment, etc., etc. And this had all happened. She had no awareness of it. And then they were all put back down on the highway going back to the Northern Territory. And that was where she got the passion for the environment and everything else, because of what happened on the spacecraft with these other people.
Is there a Dr. John, is it Mack? I want to say, So, and you worked with him?
I didn't work personally. I did meet him in Glastonbury, actually a few months before he was killed in a car accident, sadly. But he was someone whose book I happened coincidentally to pick up literally a few weeks before the first person with contact came to see me. And I was fascinated that this former professor of psychiatry had explored over and done all the psychological testing of a group of people. And he wrote the book Abduction: Human Encounters with Aliens. And he came to he was a skeptic to begin with. He came to the conclusion that this was absolutely real and wrote Passport to the Cosmos as well. And there it was all laid out. And so when the first gentleman came to see me saying, well, Mary, I've heard you're open-minded. For this, there's no support groups. For this, they just think you're a loony. He said, I'm waking up with marks on my body, shaved areas. My partner's having experiences. The children are having experiences. Can you help? And immediately I thought, well, if the whole family's having this, this is no hallucination. This is no fantasy. And the mere fact he was having tangible physical reactions to his experiences. And ultimately, that led me on this road, down this rabbit hole, where 2 weeks later, someone else comes to my door for a session, and she's interacting with beings as well. 2 weeks later. And then it was like, it exploded. My first support group, 12 people turned up.
Wow.
And I thought, hold on a minute, this is not rare. this is because I lived in Perth then, and we only had about a million population. This is a small city, you know what I mean? But already, and it was like every other person I looked at was almost, you know, I have people, my children laugh sometimes because they'll say, Mum, if someone comes to your house to either paint it or do the plumbing or whatever, they all end up telling you about their UFO experiences. It says, how does that happen? I said, because it's so common. It's so common.
I think it's common, but I think too, you are built for this. And that, you know, that wasn't a coincidence with Dr. John. And I've studied a little bit with him too about when he went to that school, and there was a big, I think there was a documentary where he had went and something showed up over the playground over this school, and all the children he interviewed them when they're like second, third grade. And then years later, he interviewed them as adults, and their memory was just exactly the same as that whole, like you said, you remember it. But, you know, I think that source code, you know, brought you John, and then it was in your field. And then now, whatever we are, it goes into your field, and people, you just draw people to you. You know, it's just like the download with the physics. You know, this is your call, and it got activated, and here you are, like doing like millions all over the world, people coming to you literally from all over. And I'm just so appreciative of it. One thing I want to ask is, you know, so some people have straight up memories as a kid and they don't go away, but then, and I've talked about this with others about how they like wipe your memory or swipe or whatever the terminology, whether they're using chemicals or frequency. But, you know, sometimes it only works for so long. And then sometimes at a 20-year mark or a 30-year mark, things kind of get through. And this happens not just with this kind of work, but sexual abuse and what have you too. You know, I've worked with people who are 40, 50 years old and all of a sudden have memories of being abused as a child. So what do you think happens with that mark, or is it just not good enough technology to keep the memories down, or is the superhuman rise above it and it needs to come through, or what do you think on that?
It's hard to know, but what I would say is that I believe on a soul level we have encoded in our DNA or our subconscious the time when we're ready to wake up to more of who and what we are, and what, you know, and it may happen because they've seen a UFO and that triggers that awareness. It may be that they have a shamanic experience that activates that awareness. It may be that they learned Reiki or some healing procedure that activates this awareness. And sometimes it's like, I always remember one lady coming to me with a completely different reason. In other words, she was looking at some abuse as a child in a children's home. There was nothing ever suggesting extraterrestrial anything. And so when I was taking it into finding out whether or not she'd had this abuse as a child, which in fact she did, then all of a sudden she finds herself on a spacecraft.
Wow.
She's saying, I'm seeing these beings, and she describes classic ET contact. And this blew her away. I mean, I was, completely shocked as well, because this is not what the intent of the regression was. It was just to find out about this other abuse. What the story to that was that she realized that she'd had ET experiences, and then that changed everything. But what was really important for her was within a few weeks of this, her daughter, who was 5, said, Mum, you're not my real mum. My parents are in space.
Oh.
And then her mother said, and she said, what do you mean? She says, she said, can you draw who your parents are, And the 5-year-old said, no, because you'd be frightened.
Oh.
And this happened just weeks after she discovered that she was an experiencer. Now, I believe that was, divinely timed, because she wouldn't have known what to make of her daughter and her daughter's experiences if she hadn't woken up to her own experiences. So for me, I think it's more about a timing thing for each individual. When they're ready, that's when something will trigger it. Some event, some experience. Might be a near-death experience for somebody. It may be a grief experience for someone else. Something profound can often trigger it. Or just simply, I want to find out about my past lives. And I will tell you something, another one that was really interesting was a young lady who wanted to just look into a past life out of curiosity. And she went back into being a healer in medieval times in England. And I asked her, and this is again just out of curiosity, she was sort of saying, I did the healing, I made up the herbs and I helped them with healing. And I said to her, so who taught you? Thinking that maybe a grandmother or father or whatever was the older healer. She said, I learned all of this in the woods. So I said, in the woods? Yes, she said, I learn it in the woods. So I said, well, what's in the woods that teaches you this? She said, a little 4-foot grey being with big black eyes shows me what herbs and what things I need to do the healing. And I was absolutely gobsmacked, and this again was like, what?
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, and when it's kids, when it's little kids too, and they're having the same stories over and over and over, that makes it even more like, it's just more powerful, because like we said earlier, you're talking to people that would never know each other, that there's, and mostly parents who are saying, we don't know what to do. What do we do? This is what's happening. This is, and I just love that you are in the position where you're helping so many people and just really going out there to do your best. Because I tell you what, I watched the documentary with your son, who seemed to come around towards the end. But when you started this, I mean, how many years have you been in? 20, 30 years now, right?
About 25 years now.
Yeah. So I think it's a lot more open now, wouldn't you say, than probably 25 years ago? Yeah, thank God.
Yeah, and it's because people have got cameras with them all the time. They're seeing these lights, and it's everyday people that are putting it on, YouTube and other places and saying, what do you reckon this is, or whatever. So there's a lot more visual evidence and videos that are showing this, but also now we're getting the government drip feeding, or maybe this is a craft, or maybe this is whatever, when it's fully obvious to anyone who's a researcher. They've known about this for 100+ years, that this is a reality. But that with all the evidence that's coming in, and people are researching it, and whistleblowers coming out with what they know about some of these facilities and whatever, I think that on the whole now, it's more or less a done deal, except for this total media acceptance. But they're a lot more respectful in the interviews that I do these days than they were 15, 20 years ago, where it was still a big giggle factor. So they're inclined to actually listen now. And what's been amusing is some of the film crews that I've talked to, and I've mentioned the indicators, and I've watched the film, the crew's eyes, and some of them have looked horrified because it's ticking their boxes. And one of them was doing the audio. She couldn't cope with it anymore, and she had to go and sit in the kitchen because she couldn't handle it, because it was obviously resonating with her and she just didn't want to go there. So I do that deliberately because I'm a bit of a rat bag, and if I can get them thinking about it. And they did such a respectful interview at the end of it because of that. It was brilliant.
That's awesome. You're hilarious. I just love your spirit. You're just an amazing woman. Strong, funny, clever, intelligent. You have such amazing things. And you have this mom thing, like, I know you're a mom to your kids, but all of us look to you as a mom too. I mean, everyone that I work with in this community knows you, feels you, has worked with you. They always have such beautiful things to say about not just your work, but the spirit of you and the way you handle people, the way you talk to people. You're very nurturing, and that was. I remember when I first contacted you, just to make the connection, my body relaxed, and I could feel like, okay, I felt better. Just there's something energetic there. And Miss Barbara has the same thing too. Miss Barbara Lamb, she's got that mom. You guys are just great moms and great moms to humanity. And I just appreciate that so much. And she says that you're one of her best friends, and she just loves you so much.
I love Barbara. We're soul sisters. We met and it was an absolute instant connection. And we've been like that ever since. She is the most beautiful soul, and I'm very blessed to be close to her. She's amazing.
Well, I'm very excited to have her on in the next few weeks too. She's going to jump on, and I had mentioned you, and she just almost got teary-eyed how happy she was to even talk about you. So anyway, we all love you. Everyone, all these comments are great. And I'm always so grateful just to hang out with you just for a little bit of time. I know you're so busy, so we are forever grateful for what you're doing. And I guess you heard that my channel was taken off. 15 years of my videos and all the content with that, but we have your videos backed up, and so we're doing our best to get everything back online. But, in the meantime, you guys continue to share and get the word out and subscribe, and we will get all of this stuff rebooted. But I'm not giving up. I know you're not giving up. We're just going to keep on sharing and loving and doing our service, doing our thing. How can people find you? Here's the books again. If you guys want to look up The New Human, Awakening Our Cosmic Heritage. I want to make sure you see the whole book. And then The Awakening was my first one that I saw. Actually, I don't know. I think it was the other way around. I think this is your first one, but this is the first one that I saw. I was just mesmerized by the cover. It just drew me right into, and anyone who gets this, you're going to know why. I mean, it's the whole thing. There's picture, underline highlights, it was just a real, what's the positive word for trigger? I don't know. An awakening.
Or a catalyst.
Catalyst. Thank you. Yes. It was very much a catalyst I was like, oh, that happened and that happened. Oh my gosh. And this happened. So you start to kind of take away, like you said, the filters. I think there's like the programming, but also just the mainstream filters. There's religion. There's all these layers that you filter everything through, and you're trying to sift through, and then you take all that away, and you're like, oh my gosh. But anyway, yeah. So how can we find you, and let everybody know how we can find you?
My website is acern.com.au, or the Alien Lady will get me, or just Google. I'm on Facebook as well, so you can find me there. So, and lots of my presentations, including interviews with you, all of those are, all you need to do is Google my name, and you should have no difficulty contacting me.
Awesome. Well, and I hope all of you will do that, and I hope you will share, so other people, you never know when you're sharing this, who's going to hear this, and it's going to change their life. It's going to activate them and bring some understanding to some of these weird things that may have happened. And people, I'm telling you, it makes you feel less crazy, and that's a good place to be, to feel whole and happy and less alone and less crazy whenever you start meeting other people that have had exact same situations. And someone who will listen and not judge is pretty nice too. So, but anyway, I will have you back soon. We'll have to round up another time in a few months or something and get you back. But do you have any conferences or things that coming up that you need to get out there or plug? Are you writing anything or?
Well, I'm doing one on Ascension with Neil Gore and Sheila Sheppy, which is in a few weeks' time. But I'm also doing Contact in the Desert as well, and another one with Sheila Sheppy on hybrids, and one in September. They're all online, so people will be able to access them. There's no traveling for me for a while.
Yes, well, that's good for all of us, and we can just be in our own homes and still connect and learn and get information and be educated. So, yes. All right, ma'am. Well, bless you so much. Be in touch. And oh yeah, Peter says hi to Peter. He loves you. Everyone loves you. Everyone who knew this, like, make sure and tell them hi. So hi from everybody. Bye from everyone. Love to you and your family, and we will talk soon. You guys make sure. Yes, make sure you guys go to swiftfire.org for the newsletter. So no matter what is going on, you guys stay connected with what we're doing at swiftfire.org. And I hope to see you guys around. I have lots of interviews coming up next week. And do follow her. And love you guys. Have a good night. Thank you.
Good night. Thank you.